The morning rush at Maple and Steam Cafe was like clockwork clattering cups, steaming milk, the hum of whispered complaints, and the faint melody from the old radio that never quite stayed in tune. Lila Monroe wiped her hands on her apron and smiled through exhaustion. She'd been working double shifts for weeks, ever since her younger brother Ethan had been admitted to the hospital. The bills didn't stop coming, and the dreams she once had, art school, a tiny studio filled with sunlight, felt like they belonged to another lifetime. Then, on a quiet Tuesday morning, he walked in. It wasn't the usual corporate crowd. He didn't wear a lanyard or hold his phone like a shield. He moved with quiet confidence, the kind that came from old money and careful restraint. His name, she'd later learn, was Alexander Hart, CEO of Hartwell Industries, one of the city's biggest firms. But to her that morning, he was just another stranger who ordered black coffee and sat by the window, lost in thought. "Rough morning?" she'd asked, trying to break the silence as she placed his cup down. He looked up, surprised. "You could say that." She smiled gently. Coffee helps, or at least, that's what we tell ourselves. Something about her honesty caught him off guard. She wasn't flirting, wasn't impressed, just present. And maybe for a man like Alexander, who spent his life surrounded by people who wanted something from him, that was rare. He came back the next day. And the next. Always the same corner table, always black coffee. By the end of the week, Lila didn't need to ask for his order anymore. She just brought it, along with a small croissant she'd started saving aside. "You look like someone who forgets to eat," she'd tease. He chuckled once. "You're not wrong." In return, he'd sometimes leave a tip that made her uneasy too much for someone like her to accept. Once she tried to hand it back. "Sir, this is considerate appreciation," he said, "for the only 10 minutes of peace I get in a day." Weeks passed. Their conversations deepened bits of her life, glimpses of his loneliness, stories about a world she'd never see and he no longer enjoyed. Then one evening, it happened. The cafe was closing early due to a power issue. Most customers had left, but Alexander stayed behind, finishing a call that sounded tense. When he hung up, his usually composed face looked defeated. "Everything all right?" Lila asked softly. He hesitated. "No one's asked me that in a while." She smiled. Maybe they should. That night, she offered him a ride home. Not because he needed it, but because she didn't like the thought of him walking alone. He refused, politely of course, but before he left, he turned and said something that would change everything. "You know, Lila," he said, using her name for the first time, "you've done more for me these past weeks than you realize. Let me repay you somehow. Anything, 3 favors, whatever you want. No questions asked." She laughed, thinking he was joking. "3 favors? What are you, some kind of genie?" He smiled faintly. Something like that. She didn't know then that he meant it. Her first favor came 2 days later. Ethan's hospital bills had doubled, and she'd hit her breaking point. Desperate, she called him half joking, half crying. "I guess I'm using one of my favors," she said. "Could you help me get an extension from the hospital? I just need time." By the next morning, her bills were marked as paid. No explanation, no acknowledgement, just a quiet message from the hospital. "Your balance has been settled." When she confronted Alexander, he looked almost embarrassed. "You said you needed help. I didn't do it for gratitude." She didn't know whether to thank him or hate him for making her feel small. "I didn't want charity," she said, eyes glistening. "And I didn't offer any," he replied gently. "I offered a favor. You've got 2 left." From then on, their connection shifted. There was gratitude, yes, but also guilt and unspoken affection. Lila tried to keep her distance, but every time Alexander entered the cafe, her heart betrayed her resolve. Then came the second favor, a stormy night, months later. The cafe was nearly empty, rain hammering against the glass. Alexander was there, alone, nursing his coffee when she sat across from him. Something she'd never done before. "I need another favor," she whispered. He leaned forward. "Anything." "Come with me." He followed her to the hospital, where Ethan was lying unconscious. She wanted him to meet her brother, the boy who'd taught her to believe in kindness, who'd once said, "Good people still exist, Lila. You just have to look closer." She wanted Alexander to see why she worked so hard, why every dollar mattered, why she refused to give up. When they entered the room, Alexander stood quietly by Ethan's bedside. Then, without a word, he placed his hand on the boy's and said, "You're a lucky kid to have her." It wasn't the money that moved her, it was the way he said it, like he finally understood what it meant to have someone. After that night, they became something undefined. Not lovers, not friends, something quieter, deeper. 2 broken souls orbiting each other, afraid to collide. But the third favor, her final request, would change everything. And neither of them could have predicted what she would ask. It was almost a year later when Alexander saw her again. The cafe had changed, new tiles, brighter lights, but the air still carried the same scent of roasted beans and quiet hope. Yet the stool by the window, where he once sat, was empty now. Lila had quit 6 months earlier. He didn't blame her. People like him and her lived in different worlds. His had skyscrapers and boardrooms. Hers had struggle, sacrifice, and quiet dignity. But every morning since she'd left, he found himself thinking of her, her laughter, her stubbornness, her eyes that never once looked at him for what he had, only for who he was. Then one morning he received a letter. The handwriting was unmistakable, small, neat, thoughtful. Inside was a note and a hospital visitor's pass. "Alexander, it's time to use my last favor. Please come. Don't bring flowers, just yourself." His heart sank. When he arrived, Lila was sitting by the window of a pale hospital room, sunlight filtering through her thin frame. She looked weaker, fragile, but still radiant in that quiet, grounded way that had always disarmed him. "Ethan?" he asked, afraid to hear the answer. She smiled softly. "He's better. He's in remission. This isn't about him." He sat down, trying to steady his breath. "Then what's your third favor?" She turned her face toward the light. "I want you to live." He frowned. "I don't understand." "You don't," she said gently, "because you've spent your whole life surviving, not living. You buy, you build, you command, but you never feel. I've seen it in your eyes every time you leave this room empty. You helped me and my brother when we had nothing. Now I want you to help yourself." He swallowed hard. "How?" "Sell the company. Take 1 year, travel, laugh, learn to cook, make mistakes, love someone for no reason. And when you do tell them what you never told me." His throat tightened. "And what's that?" She smiled faintly. "That you cared." For a long moment, neither spoke. The sound of a heart monitor filled the silence like a metronome for unspoken words. He reached for her hand, warm, trembling, still strong in its softness. "Lila," he whispered, "why now?" She looked at him with eyes full of peace. "Because I don't have much time." time left, Alexander, and I wanted my last favor to mean something that doesn't fade when I'm gone." The words hit him like a breaking wave. He wanted to protest, to promise miracles, but she shook her head. No saving this time, just living. When she passed 2 weeks later, she left behind no possessions, only a handwritten note sealed in his coat pocket. "You've got one life, Alexander. Make it feel like 3. Months later, the world read the headline. Billionaire Alexander Hart resigns. Dedicates fortune to hospitals for the working poor. But those who knew him said the real change wasn't in his wealth, it was in his smile. Because sometimes the greatest favor you can grant someone is teaching them how to live again.